Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today, which is on psychometric assessments and getting your head around them. My name is Susan Pincus, and I'm the National Careers Professional with the College of Law. And I'm really excited and very grateful to have here with me Trent Shorten and Tara Isaac from Ashurst. So I'll introduce you in a little bit more detail to both of them and their background shortly. But I just would like to start off with an acknowledgement of the country first. As we gather for today's event, we recognise that many of us are on different lands of different traditional custodians. I would like to acknowledge all of the traditional custodians of the lands we are all present on today, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are participating in this session. I pay my respects to each of their elders past, present, and emerging. So, as mentioned, today's topic is getting your head around psychometric assessments. And hopefully by the end of the session, you may even learn to embrace them rather than viewing them as an obstacle and something to be terrified of. In terms of my experience with psychometric assessments, in my previous role when I was working as a HR management and recruitment specialist in the corporate sector, I used psychometric assessments extensively as part of the recruitment and selection process for graduate and professional staff. I also have Tara and Trent from Ashurst, as you know, a global law firm with diverse practice areas. And they also have extensive HR and recruitment backgrounds and have been involved in clerkship and graduate recruitment. A little bit about Tara and Trent. So Tara is a HR consultant, graduate programs with Ashurst. In her role, she manages both clerkship and graduate recruitment, as well as the respective programs for the Melbourne office. She has over 8 years' experience in HR and recruitment, having previously worked for large organisations from industries including financial regulation, investment banking, and legal services. Tara previously spent 6.5 years working in London before returning to Australia in mid-2018. She is an avid traveller, pre-COVID of course, and she loves cooking. Trent is a learning and development consultant with Ashurst. In his role, he manages both clerkship and graduate learning for Asia Pacific, as well as other junior lawyer programs. He is an established HR generalist with 7 years' experience in HR and recruitment. He has previously worked for large organisations from sectors including government, entertainment, and legal services. Most recently, Trent has worked internationally at leading global law firms in the graduate recruitment space. He has a strong passion for travel, soccer, snowboarding, and of course, graduate recruitment. I'd also like to say up front that we're not psychologists, we're not statisticians who have a background in the intricate details of statistical validity and data measurement, but rather we have practical working knowledge and grounding through our roles and experience as HR practitioners. A little bit of general housekeeping before we get started. If you could ask your questions in the Q&A box rather than in the chat, it just makes it much easier for me to manage the questions. And we'll leave the questions until the end of the session as we've got quite a lot of information to get through. We'll also have a recording of today's session, which will be forwarded to all attendees in the next couple of weeks. So we will now kick off the session, and I will start by just giving some general background information on psychometric assessments in general, and then Tara and Trent will speak specifically to what tools they use at Ashurst. So at the end of today, you should be able to come away with an understanding of when and why assessments are used, the different types of assessments, how to best prepare. Thanks, Trent. So when are assessments used? So that's really does vary between organisations, and law firms typically and historically have been a little bit slower in coming aboard with using psychometric assessments. So typically your larger corporates and your government organisations would use the following recruitment process, which would consist of your online application form, followed by a form of psychometric assessment, a phone interview, an assessment centre, and an interview. But as I mentioned, not all mid and top tier firms use psychometric assessments. They've tended to kind of use more of a standard recruitment process, and they also used, this was pre-COVID, of course, cocktail evenings, breakfast, lunch sessions, and things like that also to kind of gather more information about candidates. Some firms use tools such as Talent Q, Korn Ferry, the Savile Holdsworth Suite, OPQ, which is a personality tool, and ability assessments via, I think it's Koru, K-O-R-U. They also use practical inbox tasks where you're required to draft an email updating progress on a task and response to a voicemail, for example. And that would look at your time spent, your word count, errors, and that type of thing. In terms of the competencies that recruiters are looking for, typically some of those would include global mindset, international experience, imagination and innovation, community involvement, your balance in terms of interests outside of work and law, life experience, a critical and a curious mindset, and continual learning and upskilling. So in terms of why they're used obviously to measure an individual's natural aptitude and their capacity for learning and their general suitability for a role. And they look at a range of different things, and they provide objective information to look at candidates. And sometimes this information is harder to glean through the recruitment process. So it is just another way of getting more information about the individual. Okay. So in terms of the types of psychometric assessments that are used, we have aptitude, which are also known as ability and cognitive tests. And they measure general cognitive abilities, and they predict how well an individual will acquire, retain, and apply information on the job. And typically they would include your verbal reasoning, your numerical reasoning, and your abstract reasoning. Sometimes spatial reasoning and mechanical reasoning tests are also used, but they tend to be more for engineering and technical type roles. Typically, they consist of multiple choice where there are right and wrong answers, and they are timed. So the trick, and you'll learn more about this, is to work very quickly, but always to avoid wild guessing. In addition to the cognitive and ability tests, we also have what we call personality or behaviour questionnaires. And these are typically self-report questionnaires where there is no right or wrong results. And these determine how you feel, think, or behave in certain conditions. And they identify things such as your workplace and your organisation team fit. And they look at a range of competencies also, which are kind of deemed to be important prerequisites and skills in an organisation. They also look at traits and characteristics such as openness, optimism, interaction with people, stability, etc. And there are no right or wrong answers. And it is important to measure here, though, that they do have inbuilt scales to measure honesty and consistency. So in other words, you can't fake it. So if you go in thinking that this is the type of person they want, so this is how I'm going to answer those questionnaires, you'll end up distorting the statistics or the validity score, and it's really doesn't achieve anything. So I would really stress that it is best just to answer those very naturally without overthinking and engineering. In terms of how they're scored, this will vary according to different organisations. Some organisations will use the graduate norm group, but Ashurst, from memory, Tara and Trent, they have their own norms. You use your own norms?
Correct, yeah.
Yep. And also personality questionnaires would be the same. So they could be either normed against the graduate group or the organisation. But I think it's also important here to mention that organisations, particularly like Ashurst, take a holistic approach as well. So it's not about using a raw score as the be-all end-all deciding factor about whether a person goes forward in the application process. So there's a whole number of different things that are taken into account. So it's the actual application that you have put together. It's also a matter of looking at, your work experience before, both law and outside of law, what voluntary work you might have done, outside interests, etc. So it would be very short-sighted for any organisation to ever look at someone's results as the be or end or deciding factor. So in terms of how best to prepare, it is very, very hard to prepare, but then at the same time, I think it's important that candidates actually try and find out what type of assessments they're going to be going through. So just to get a bit of an idea if it's going to be a personality assessment, or is it going to be your cognitive assessments, and also just to make sure that you even have a look at doing some of the practice tests. So I think that even though the practice tests aren't going to be the same ones that you're going to do, they still just give you some familiarity and some comfort level, as opposed to kind of improving your skills. And it's important to get a good night's sleep. And sometimes I've heard that it's also good to avoid drinking too much coffee before you have them. I would have thought the coffee would have helped, but I'm not so sure about that. Anything around exercising your brain could be quite useful in terms of doing Sudoku and crosswords and things like that. And if you do have special needs, it's important that you ask ahead and you raise that with the appropriate person. Okay, so that's it from me for the moment. I'm going to now pass you over to the experts.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Susan. Firstly, hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming, and thanks to the College of Law for having us. This is the second year we've done this, and super excited to talk you guys through psychometric testing. And what we're going to do now is specifically talk you through psychometric testing at Ashurst. So as Susan mentioned before, none of us here are trained psychologists. However, we've had extensive experience in terms of the recruitment and using these tools. So what we want to do is essentially talk you through what Ashurst uses, ways to prepare, and we'll actually show you some sample tests and questions. So to help you get your head around psychometric testing, this is what Tara and I will go over in our presentation today. So as I mentioned, we'll go over psychometric testing at Ashurst. So where do we use it, when do we use it, and what tests do we use? We'll go over what competencies we're looking for, so why we're actually using these tests and what we're actually trying to find out by using these tests. As I mentioned, we'll go through a few sample tests and questions. So we'll actually show you the 3 tests that we use, and we'll also go through some sample games and just explain those in a little bit more detail. And then lastly, we will give you some more tips on how to prepare. So obviously Susan has given you some already, but we'll give you some more hints and tips on how to prepare, and also the best way to approach our specific tests as well. So I know this is a very busy slide. Essentially what this is a suite of psychometric tests as provided by our third-party provider, Rebellion. So at Ashurst, we've used Rebellion for quite a number of years. And when we use it, like Susan mentioned before, is actually after your application phase, but then before you're invited to interview. So we've used this test for about 4 years now at Ashurst, and we actually now align it with our performance appraisals once you are working at Ashurst. So we will actually go back and look at your psychometric scores, for example, once you do become a graduate, and align that with your performance appraisals to match things up and to see whether this psychometric testing is actually working for us and track those outcomes. So there are many different tests out there, as Susan mentioned. Each has their own merits as to what the organization is trying to find out from you and what they're actually trying to test. But at Ashurst, we're looking to test 3 different aspects. So I've just highlighted these here. So the first one is a candidate's general cognitive ability and problem-solving ability. The second is work-related values. And the third is emotional intelligence. So we'll go over each of these 3 individually, showing you the competencies you're looking for, how we test each aspect. And as I mentioned, we'll take you through some of the tests as well and the games and things like that. So to take you through the first, which is cognitive ability, I'm just going to hand over to my colleague, Tara, to step you through this specific assessment.
Thanks so much, Trent. So what is cognitive ability? As Susan previously touched on, it's the ability for an individual to acquire, organise, recall and apply information. Obviously something that is very important for lawyers today. But how does that translate into the workplace? So people with good cognitive ability will demonstrate the workplace behaviours and capabilities that are displayed on this slide. So being able to meet moving deadlines, which will happen all the time in this environment, both with internal and external client demands. Adjusting to organisational change. These are changes that not only affect internal stakeholders, but may also affect our external clients as well. Presenting a report using data in concise and impactful ways. Finding a solution to unforeseen challenges. As you may know, a lot of our clients aren't coming to us with easy questions, as they all have sort of in-house lawyers to deal with some of the easy questions. So they come to us with more complex legal issues that has a larger element of problem solving to it. And finally, starting a different role at the same organisation, which might include rising up the ranks from associate to senior associate to partner, or complementing your existing role with extra responsibilities. These are just some of the behaviours that we are looking for in our candidates from a cognitive ability standpoint. So the next question is, how do we test this? So we test this through a module called Cognify. So this is based on 3 attributes in this module: problem solving, numerical reasoning, and verbal knowledge. These results will predict how candidates will perform on the job. And we do this by using 6 mini games, which I'll go through with you shortly. These games should take you approximately 30 minutes, and there will be tutorials for each of them. So before you go through and jump in, make sure that you go through the tutorials. We highly recommend that you do this a few times. Then you can redo the demo as many times as you like before undertaking the real thing. The business outcomes that are proven by those who do well in this test include better job performance, increased productivity, shorter onboarding times, reduced involuntary turnover, and improved training outcomes. So let's learn about the games. So the first is problem solving. So this measures a candidate's ability to solve new problems without prior knowledge. So it can include your ability to learn, work under time pressure, evaluate and understand information, especially new information, be able to be flexible and adapt to switching tasks, focusing your attention, and to recover from errors. So as you can see, the highlighted games under problem solving there, and we'll now go through each of those games. So the first is called Shortcuts. It's a maze type game where the aim is to collect the stars using the boy marble in the shortest path possible. So there will be 7 different puzzles, and each level will increase in difficulty. This is a timed game, and you'll have 4 minutes to work through as many levels as you can. As you can see there, the boy marble on the left has different numbered pathways. and there are obstacles, which are the red marbles that you need to move. The aim of the game is to get the stars on the right in the shortest way possible. The middle one is Gridlock, which looks very similar to Tetris and is a game where you need to rotate the blocks to fill in the grid as quickly as you can using the shapes that you have provided, that have been provided to you. So there are 9 puzzles in total, which again will increase in complexity. It is timed and you'll have 3 minutes to work through as many levels as you can. And the final one on this slide is called Resemble. So this test will give you a pattern on the left-hand side, and you need to replicate this on the right-hand side by rotating the pieces provided. There are 9 puzzles to complete, again with increasing complexity each time, and you have 3 minutes to complete this. And because there is a strict time limit and the games are not designed to be completed, so don't worry if you don't get through all of them, just do your best. So sometimes it will be better for you just to take your time and do a good job on the ones that you can complete rather than trying to move too quickly through it. The second attribute is numerical reasoning, which uses 2 gamified tests. And this will measure how well a candidate can comprehend quantitative and numerical concepts, which includes your ability to learn, problem solve under pressure, evaluate and consider information, adapting to change, maintaining focus and attention to detail, which is extremely important for junior lawyers and lawyers more generally, and recover from mistakes. Again, as you can see, the 2 highlighted games down the bottom, and now we'll go into what they entail. So Number Bubbles, other than having an amazing name, is a game where you have floating bubbles flying around on your screen, each with its own equation. So the objective is to pop the bubbles with the formula that matches the number shown on the bottom of the screen as quick as you can. So as you can see, the example on the slide, this particular target number is 12. So you would click on all the equations that should equal up to 12. There are 10 rounds and each will last for about 20 seconds. And each will increase in complexity as you go along. The second game is called Tally Up. This has a similar look to Number Bubbles. However, this game will show you 2 different sides, a left and a right, and a set of numbers. You need to quickly determine which side has the highest value and click on that arrow. Or similarly, if it's equal. So you will need to click on the correct sign at the bottom within 4 seconds, and you'll have 1 minute and 45 seconds to complete as many rounds as possible. And the final game is called Verbal Knowledge. So this measures the candidate's breadth of knowledge and ability regarding written language. So this includes your ability for reading and writing skills, attention to detail, especially under time pressure, being able to extract meaning from text, and working efficiently, recovering from mistakes also. There's only one game in this, and it's called Proof It. This is an attention to detail-based game, looking at misspelled words, grammatical and punctual errors within the information given to you in the game. There will be 5 rounds, and you'll have 5 minutes to complete, so approximately 1 minute each round. As you can see, there's a number on the right-hand side, which has got a number of errors remaining. So all you need to do is identify and click on each error. Again, I think this is important to note that the games are not meant to be finished. Just do your best and work through the games to the time limit. Now I'm going to hand over to Trent, who's going to talk to you through emotional intelligence.
Thanks, Tara. Before we dive into emotional intelligence, I just want to reiterate that point that Tara's just mentioned in terms of the games aren't really supposed to be expected to be finished, and it's really actually very rare that anyone will actually finish. So if you do, when you do go through these tests, and if you do run at a time, that's not an indication that you haven't reached the end. It's very rare that anybody would actually reach the end, if not almost impossible. So don't be too hard on yourself once you do come to that, and if you're not finishing where you might usually do. So as mentioned, the second ability we are testing is emotional intelligence. So traditionally, employees are required to hide their emotions a long time ago. But obviously now the research and organizations acknowledge that emotions are actually useful. And it's about expressing them constructively and in a beneficial manner. So emotional intelligence is the ability to perceive emotions, use emotions to facilitate cognitive process, and understand emotions and manage them. So what are the abilities of those with high emotional intelligence first? So workplace behaviors of those with high emotional intelligence, as you can see listed on the screen here, include easily forming relationships with people. So this includes both clients and colleagues, so both your internal clients and your external clients, and building those relationships. Secondly, demonstrating effective leadership skills. So for example, identifying others' emotions and actually using this as a tool to better engage them as a leader. Third is influencing stakeholders. So identifying others' emotions and adjusting your approach to suit this. So for example, you may wait in asking someone something if they're looking particularly stressed or angry or whatever it might be, and maybe find a better time to actually ask that question where you might get, for instance, a more favorable answer, or they might be more engaged with what you're talking about as well. Fourthly, is responding to change or stressful events. So basically being able to identify your own emotions for one, but then also putting yourself in other people's shoes and thinking about the bigger picture in terms of how people might be feeling emotionally around a particular situation, and then also identifying bigger picture about what the best way forward may be. And it may not be the same for each person, depending on what they may be feeling. And lastly, being able to adopt an approach in the moment. So basically identifying social cues and reacting mid-conversation if a person's emotions were to change unexpectedly, or so you can respond accordingly to that. So for instance, if you're in a difficult conversation, it may not be going the way you expected it to go, and being able to think on the spot and actually respond accordingly to however they're showing their emotions and what you're identifying their emotions to be. So how do we test this? So we use an emotional intelligence test called Emotify. And this is used to assess your ability to accurately identify and understand emotions and how to react to them. So research has shown that emotional intelligence is linked with important work-related outcomes, such as interpersonal effectiveness, collaboration and teamwork, decision-making, and also success in leadership and management roles. So for Emotify, you'll complete 2 mini games, which are both very interactive and engaging. So that basically what they do is ask you to correctly identify emotions and also understand how people might be feeling in certain situations. Each mini game is timed, so similar to Cognifier, and this section will take you about 20 minutes to complete, depending on how long you spend on the tutorials. So again, you can do the tutorials as many times as you like. And I did see a question in the chat before about, can we see whether like how many times you've done the tutorial? No, we can't, and therefore it doesn't impact on your final results. So you can literally sit there for an entire day and do it. We'll have no idea, and that won't affect your later results. So I definitely encourage you to spend as long as you need doing those and making yourself familiar with your tutorials before you launch in the real thing. Okay, so for Emotify, I wanted to talk you through a couple of the games that we use. So the first one is called Matching Faces. So you will see on the screen on the right, all these things changing in terms of what the person's emotion is showing, and then also a label below. So your task in this is to identify whether these expressions you believe are matching up to the label. So for instance, it'll go through things like happiness, sadness, fear, surprise, and many others. So each face will change after 3 seconds. So it is a high pace activity, as we mentioned. And there's around 30 faces or rounds for you to complete. So basically all you'll need to do is tick incorrect or correct based on the information given to you there. So what this will do is test your perception of emotion based on the people's faces. So the faces will change, so they won't always be the same in terms of what the emotion actually is, the gender of the person, the ethnicity of the person, the age of the person, and it will be random each time. So it's not always the same bank of questions essentially that you'll go through. It's completely random as to what people will get. With this one, which is what you won't get in Cognify, is you'll actually get direct feedback from this game. So as soon as you click a cross or a tick, it'll actually tell you whether you're right or not. So you'll get real-time feedback as to how you're actually going. So as you progress through this game, you can actually get better at it. So for instance, you can identify maybe emotion incorrectly, but then next time you'll obviously know what that emotion actually is. So you can actually improve on your scores as you go. So it's about recovery as well, not necessarily just having your first instinct. The second game in Emotify is in emotional intelligence is emotional ties. So in this game, there are 3 parts, each of which you're required to read a number of everyday situations and decide on how a person is feeling. So to do this, you're required to choose an image. So similar to the matching faces before, you'll get faces that look very similar to that, with people smiling, maybe looking angry or stressed or whatever it may be, and matching this to the emotion involved or what you think to be involved in the specific situation. So as you can see here, there's different scenarios and they actually get more complex as we go along. So for example, on the left-hand side, I'm hoping you guys can read that on my screen. If not, you should be able to see the middle one. Essentially, it will give you a scenario as to what's happened. So for those that can't read the left-hand side, it basically tells us that John is running late for an interview he's recently applied for. So it's your job to basically match what emotion you think he would be feeling. So for instance, you might choose something along the lines of stress or fear, with John being late to that important interview. And then what it will do is then give you another part to that scenario. So for example, when John arrives, he finds out the interviewer has been caught up in another meeting and the interview is also running late as well. So then, for instance, John might be feeling stress or fear in that first instance, but now he actually might be feeling relief. The tasks, as I mentioned, do get more complex and longer and longer. So for example, on this slide, you can see in the middle, there's a certain situation where 2 people are involved for an extra complexity, and they might be feeling different things or might be feeling the same thing. And then with the one on the far right-hand side, you can see that there's different layers to the question and the emotions might actually change through time. Okay, so moving on to the third and final testing that we use, which is called values testing. So this is related to your values as a person and what you consider in your ideal job or organization. So these are aspects of your ideal job that are considered most important to you when looking for a position. So we've outlined values aligned to Ashurst from our staff and partners, which we've identified over a number of years, that also relate to our values that you might have seen on our website as well. So this is completely Ashurst specific for this, and this is also not a timed exercise. So you can actually spend as much time as you like on this one. This measure is as much as for you as it is for us, as it will actually align your values with ours to better identify basically if we're a good fit for each other. What this will predict is essentially your engagement, so a candidate's engagement with the firm, and also tenure as well. So obviously, if the values don't match, there might be a possibility once you do get in the organization that you might look to move on, obviously, if those values aren't matching when you're in the organization. So it gives us a little bit of indication of those things before you actually enter. So what you will do in this exercise is rank 20 key work factors based on importance, which are compared with the firms, in this case, Ashurst. Again, it's not timed, but it will probably take you between 5 and 10 minutes to do, depending on how quick you are and I guess how set you are on the certain values that you hold. So again, the exercise is all about matching. It will compare the aspects that you consider most important and what you're looking for in an employer against their organization values and what they can provide you. So to give you an indication of what that actually looks like, this is what a candidate sees when you're required to rank these statements. So in ours, and it may vary between specific organizations, but we essentially have 20 statements divided into 5 sections, so 4 items per section, matched to our organizational profile. So again, it's not timed. However, I'd encourage you not to spend too much time on this and overthinking what the values might be. It's very much about your first instincts and gut instincts, which is often the most accurate when it comes to your values, rather than thinking about it too much and trying to align it. And as Susan mentioned before, trying to sort of fake and come up with a personality that is not exactly yours that you think Ashurst might want. With this one, there's no right or wrong answers, as it's basically purely on aligning values. And you can't really cheat with this one too much, as I guess it would be impossible to know in what order Ashurst may have these values, which again goes back to the point of not spending too much time and actually trying to work it out for yourself. as I mentioned before, it's as much as about you than it is us. So it's better to be honest within these situations to make sure these values are aligning, and you will actually get this score feedback as well once you complete it. On scores, I'll now hand back to Tara to talk about how we measure these tests.
Thanks, Trent. So as you can see, this is an example of a normal distributive bell curve that is representative of all of our various tests that we use. As Susan touched on, all of our assessments are measured against our own company normative data, so only measured against our current and previous graduates. Other firms and companies might assess you against industry data, i.e. the lawyers within the industry or graduates within all industries. However, we only compare it against our own firm. So you will receive a percentage score for each assessment, so Cognify, emotional intelligence and values, which will then go on to an overall suitability score. We want to stress again that there is no cutoff mark, and all applications are looked at holistically with this data alongside your application. So in no way are you downgraded for a score that you might not have received a really good mark in. We look at all applications holistically, and we use this as a tool alongside, not as a general marking tool. So how best to prepare? You were given 1 week to complete this when we send you the link. So we recommend that you find a time in your schedule that week and block out maybe an hour, 2 hours for some training that might work for you. So if you're a morning person, maybe first thing in the morning, if that's when you're sharpest, book in a morning where you're not going to have any other distractions and your schedule is clear. If you prefer to do it at night and you're a night owl, then book in some time in the evening. But just make sure that you're not impacted by personal conditions such as illness, really sleepy. Make sure that you're comfortable, preferably at a desk, you're relaxed and have had enough rest and exercise so that your mind is working at its best. Free yourself of other distractions by turning off your phone and getting it out of sight. Make sure that you go into a separate room where you can't be disturbed by family and friends. And if you wear glasses or lenses, make sure that you have them with you and that they're clean and ready to go. Just make sure that you relax and take some deep breaths. Don't put yourself in a position where you feel like you have to rush and just get it done because you have to move on to the next task. Just make sure that you have time to really be in that moment. As we mentioned, most of the games will give you some real-time feedback. So if you get 1 or 2 things wrong, don't get down on yourself and give up. It's about how well you recover as well. And secondly, make sure that you complete all of the example items and tutorials in the assessments themselves. You can do this as many times as you like before the real thing. So make sure that you go in this when you feel like you're the most prepared. As we touched on, can you practice? You can absolutely do other things, so use ability tests, but both cognitive ability and emotional intelligence are typically very innate skills. So it can help to practice the games that you are undertaking, to make yourself familiar with them, to gain some knowledge on the types of questions being used, and also just generally to practice gamified versions. With emotional intelligence, we'd also recommend that you just become really aware of your own emotions before you undertake it, which can help you get thinking more about emotions and help you to better identify them when the time comes. We'll also share some practice links shortly, which you can copy down and access. And finally, can you fake it? With cognitive ability and emotional intelligence, there are right and wrong answers, so no, you can't. And attributes and values, as Trent and Susan touched on, this is based on personal point of views. It's impossible to know what ideal profiles look like. So we just ask you to do the most important thing, which is be consistent and just be yourself. The practice links now will be shared in the Zoom chat as well, so you can access those. And now we will open it up to questions.
Thank you, Trent and Tara. That was very comprehensive. That was really, really helpful. So we might just start with the questions that are in the Q&A. So someone has asked here, are senior associates and other senior staff required to undertake psychometric tests as part of the recruitment process? So is it not just limited to graduates?
So at the moment, we are using it graduates and other levels. So it can be sort of more general level entries. We don't use it for senior associates at this time. However, if the data continues to prove to be very conclusive, then that might be something that we might look into. But as it's still fairly new for our firm and we've only been using it for 4 years, we're still sort of undertaking all of the feedback and all the analysis. So at the moment, it's just at graduate level.
Okay, and it's not obviously used for clerks.
So it's used as part of the clerkship program. So, and that's how it goes through. Yeah.
So initially, and you wouldn't have to do it again when you become a graduate?
No, just to come in as the clerkship, and they're all considered as the part of the graduate program.
Fabulous. Someone has just asked the question around matching faces, that could disadvantage those with autism as they have low facial recognition ability. Do you want to comment on that?
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. Oh, sorry, Trent, you go ahead.
No, you go for it. Go for it.
We encourage anybody that has anything that they think could impair them to reach out to us, and we can always have that conversation. So if there's any kind of learning difficulties or anything like that, then we can obviously work with them. Emotional intelligence is only one factor. So if it's something that they can't take part in, and we will also take that into consideration. So in no way do we discriminate against anybody for any kind of autism or learning difficulties or anything like that. Brent, have you got anything else you'd like to add?
No, I'd just say that anybody that needs reasonable adjustments or think they may need reasonable adjustments, always reach out to the HR consultant or the recruitment manager that's listed, even if it is just a conversation, just to clarify at what points things might be needed, or just to clarify the entire application process to find out whether you may need reasonable adjustments or not. It will never go against you and be disadvantaged. I'd actually argue it's probably an advantage to reach out and discuss those things, to be quite honest.
Question here that is around algorithms underlying the predictions developed. So that's a bit of a tricky one, as not being statisticians. I don't know if you've got a response to that around the algorithms and I suppose this behind it, what goes on behind the scenes.
I don't off the top of my head, unless you do, Tara, but that's certainly a question we can take to Rebellion and follow up with after the session. More than happy to.
Thank you. In general, is it better to take more time on each task to get a better score in each section rather than trying to complete more of the test? So kind of going, a little bit slower and steadier to get the answers right as opposed to rushing through.
Yeah, I think in most cases that is the right aim. There are some where if you don't answer, you'll completely miss out. So I think in the really short, sharp ones, like the number ones where you've only got 4 seconds, I think if you don't know, just take a guess. But absolutely, I would recommend that you take a little bit more time. Don't get too carried away in trying to get to a higher level. Just make sure that what you're doing is correct. And that I think would get you further along in the long run.
Okay, would ASHES consider, is it ISAT scores for those who had undertaken that test? I'm not sure what ISAT scores.
LSAT, I think it would be.
Oh, sorry, LSAT.
Tara, I'm more than happy for you to jump in, but not generally. If you want to include your LSAT scores in your application, more than welcome to, but we will look at the psychometric testing separate to that, essentially, in terms of the scores. But if you'd like to include your application, more than happy for you to do that as another data point.
Okay, thank you. Would you ever recommend using a psychometric testing app for practice tests or to expand your practice?
So I personally use like a game I call Imiosity. And I just do that just for my own general ability to kind of brain train. And I find that some of those games that are on the psychometric testing are quite similar. So for me, it's more just a way of continuously keeping up to date with those sorts of things. So that's something that I personally do. I don't know, Trent, if you have any other recommendations.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, I mean, it's not always going to be relevant depending on what the app is and what the psychometric testing is with the firm you're using. What I'd do is try and understand the firms or whoever you're applying to, the organizations you're applying to. They'll be more than forthcoming with the type of psychometric testing they're using. They're not there to hide it. So if it isn't listed on their website explicitly, again, flick them an email, give them a call to find out exactly what tests they're using. So you can sort of, I guess, curate in terms of what practice tests you're doing. But absolutely, I think it all can help. One with the questions, because usually a lot of them will use very similar questions or very similar games. Which will also help you get familiar with those gamified sort of versions if you're not familiar with those types of games.
Can we just get the spelling of that one?
Yeah, it's LUMOSITY, and there is like a free trial one, so it just gives you sort of like limited games, but they release different games every day, so you get 3 new games that you can play, which is good.
I don't know. You said that a bit too quick.
Oh, sorry, LUMOSITY.
Fabulous. Okay, fabulous. That's really good. Thank you for clarifying that. Just answered that question. You mentioned before that you refer back to assessments for performance reviews, but in your experience, how accurately do the psychometric assessments match the person selected? Have there been occasions where the result is completely different to the person?
I think it's still fairly new, so I think it's hard to really predict that at this point, given, you know, if we've been using it for 4 years, our grad class are only sort of newly settled lawyers that have sort of started this process. Having said that, they're all doing really well in the firm, and I think that they're all thriving. So in that sense, we haven't seen any sort of outliers there. I think where it does probably change is areas maybe like emotional intelligence, because I think when you start working at a workplace, you have the ability to, I think, learn more about emotional intelligence and working with people and on the collegiate side. So I think some people might be able to increase their emotional intelligence just by nature of working more with people and dealing with people. But maybe I haven't seen that sort of on the Cognify at this point.
Thanks. We'll go. Looks like there's a couple of things in chat. So if anyone has got more questions, this is a good time. Okay. So yeah, the presentation, we'll get the recording, which will include the presentation. So that's all good. Any more questions? If you've got any other questions as well, maybe even relating to Ashurst's recruitment process. Is there an age group that's not required to do the test? I don't know. I would doubt it.
So not at this stage. It's all applicants for the clerkship that are required to do it. But again, if there was any concerns, we would just encourage everybody just to reach out and speak to their HR consultant, and we can discuss any sort of one-off situations with the individual.
Yeah. Okay. This interesting question. Can psychometric testing be used to check if someone is a psychopath or a sociopath?
In my experience for recruitment testing, I'm going to say no, and certainly not with the Ashurst ones that we use by any means. There may be some out there that may test those sorts of things, but absolutely none that we would ever use, and I doubt that many organisations would use that if there was.
Right, okay. Are you open to recruiting law students that are studying remotely?
Yeah, if you're undergoing an Australian degree, then absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. If you have done the test before for a previous job application, are your old scores compared to your new scores? Actually, that's a good question.
Yeah.
In terms of repeating the test.
Yeah, so with Rebellion, you can only undergo the test once a year. And I think if you had done Rebellion at a previous interview, you would probably only do the values testing as part of ours, and then they would just compare your scores with our normative data. But every year you would have the ability to redo that test for different workplaces, and other workplaces use different psychometric testing, so you would just do it as per each firm or each provider's requirements.
Chances are you would normally start afresh, because like I mentioned before, there was a massive suite, for instance, just for Rebellion on there, so they might actually use slightly different tests. So chances are you might just complete it completely afresh. But if you knew between the two firms that it's exactly the same test and you wanted to transfer that over within the 12 months, we can absolutely do that.
Would this process apply to foreign experienced attorneys moving to Australia, or is that a somewhat different track?
Again, at the moment, probably not if you're moving in as a lateral hire, so an experienced hire, and you're moving, as a third, fourth year lawyer. At the moment, it's not likely that you would use it. If you were applying for our clerkship, then you would be required to do it.
Are the tests done for law student placements? So I'm assuming that's for clerkships.
Just for clerkships, yeah. So in terms of, I guess, more ad hoc work experience, in terms of law students placements, no, but for the seasonal clerkships, yes.
Okay. You mentioned in the beginning there are several different areas to test, but Ashurst only uses 3 areas. Is that the norm?
Between firms, in my experience, yeah, it's generally 2 or 3. I think there certainly can be too much data when it comes to recruitment and looking at these things. So most will only, some may have just 1. But yeah, I think you'd probably find it very rare to have any more than sort of 3 or 4, because yeah, like I mentioned, I think there can be too much data within that. And obviously it would take you a very long time to even get through the application process, which is not exactly what firms want either.
Okay. Are the clerkship and graduate programs open for international students?
You have to have your own right to work. So we're not in a position where we can sponsor students. So typically speaking, if you're on a student visa, then we can't accept your application. But if you have your own permanent residency or citizenship, then yes, we can definitely accept your application.
There's a question here around Raven's test. I'm not familiar with Raven's test. Is it similar? Do you know about Raven's test?
No.
No.
We can investigate that though, if you like.
Yeah.
Get back to you.
I'm not sure if that's a personality one or a different one. All right. Sorry, what about those on post-study work visas?
It would probably depend if they were on their own pathway to permanent residency. By the time they get to their clerkship, and any sort of individual candidate is more than welcome to contact me. We can circulate my contact details, and you can reach out with any questions you have about eligibility, and we can discuss that.
Okay. All right. I'm just going to grab these ones from the chat, but if people could just put the questions into Q&A, so it just makes it easier for me to keep track of them. Is there no, we've done that one. Yeah, I did the psychometric test a year ago and failed. When can I take it again?
Yeah, so the Rebellion, as we said, Rebellion hold it for a year. So if it was a year ago, you should be able to redo it.
More generally about Ashurst, before the testing, are there short answer questions to answer in conjunction to the CV and cover letter?
There will be, we are just working on finalising that at the moment. So there normally was 3, but there could be anywhere between 1 to 3 short answers at that point. So.
And what would they be around? What would they be, kind of behavioural type questions?
Sometimes it's just about point of view, or previous questions have been, where do you see the field of law being in the next 10 years, or how has new law changed with technology? It's just more, I guess, their point of view on diversity, or ways that, we can sort of help to support people in the workplace. Trent, do you have last year's?
Yeah, I was just going to say, for example, last year had 2 questions. So the first question was centered around yourself. So it was centered around or what you think is your proudest achievement, your greatest achievement, and why. And then the second one was about disruption to law firms and just more of a commerciality piece. So just gaining that commercial awareness in a short answer question, essentially. So yeah, they tend to be along those lines, depending on whether it's sort of 2 or 3 questions, but you'll generally get one about yourself and then also one that sort of tests your commercial awareness as well.
Is there an age preference for applicants, as in mature students? So do you welcome mature students?
Absolutely. Yep.
Is doing a clerkship the entry point for Ashurst?
As part of the graduate, to become a graduate, yes, it is the entry point. Yeah.
How would you consider the candidate passed the test? Do you choose the top 10 percentile of candidates, for instance?
No, we look at everybody's score alongside their university, alongside their application. We just use it to, I guess, help us see a more well-rounded person. In many cases, the people who get the top, 5% aren't necessarily the most suitable candidate for a number of reasons. So we even, want people kind of in the middle that are really well-rounded. So they have emotional intelligence, they have values that connect with us, they have an ability to comprehend new information and use it, but they also are able to prioritize and multitask and be able to do a part-time job and university. So it's by no means a formulaic way that we use it. We do use it just to give us more information on the applicant.
Yeah, it's a little bit like academic results as well. You would never use those as the basis.
Absolutely not.
How do you evaluate? Gosh, the questions are coming in. Can't keep on top of them, which is great. We've had 28 questions, I think. How do you evaluate candidates who might be working in a law firm with potential conflict with Ashurst?
For a clerkship?
In terms of psychometric testing, there wouldn't be any conflict. In terms of general conflicts, we'll always do conflicts checks regardless of what level you're coming in. Generally, it's not an issue. And if it is, it might be potential that you may be barred, say, from certain cases or whatever it might be. So you've not, conflicted out of that matter or whatever it may be. But we'll certainly check that before, for both your benefit and our benefit as well.
Does Ashurst take law diploma from the LPAB? Is that the Legal Practice Admissions Board? I'm not quite sure what LPAB. Perhaps that person might add a bit more in there. Do you know what the LPAB is? No. All right.
No.
We might come back to that question. Do you expect your number? Oh, it's an alternate route to qualify. New South Wales instead of a law degree. Diploma versus degree.
Happy for you to reach out to me and we can discuss that one offline, Chantel. I'd need to look into it and speak to the New South Wales counterparts. So feel free to contact me and we can discuss that.
Do you expect your number of clerks onboarded to drop in response to COVID?
We haven't seen a decline at this stage. We were able to really navigate online clerkships last year really successfully. And our work is still very steady. So at this stage, we don't see a reduction in place.
Okay. we'll just keep going. We've also got a question around, do you recruit from forage internships or look at those module results?
So we don't look at the results from Forage. So Forage, for those of you that don't know, it's basically online experience that you can get with law firms. So it's a way for you to undertake some modules at each law firm to learn a little bit about practice areas and some real work that you might do sort of as a clerk or a graduate. So it's a great way for you to, I think, better enhance your legal understanding and whether commercial law is what you would like to do. So we take it into consideration in terms of your CV and your experience, and the fact that you're trying to upskill yourself to do some more work on the commercial law side, but we don't look at your results. So that is purely for you to learn and to start to upskill, and just we encourage as many students that are interested to learning more about Ashurst to undertake it.
For those that do complete Forage, I'd encourage you to put it on your CV under extracurricular activities or volunteer opportunities, just to say that you have completed it, to show that extra interest as well.
Okay, that's great. That's good to know. I think we might have come to an end of our questions. So it's 1:30 on the dot. So we've done really, really well to cover so much information. So I think we will end up there. I just wanted to thank you, Tara and Trent, for such a fantastic and such a kind of informative, useful session. And I'm sure that people that have been listening to it will be definitely in the know now and have a bit more of an idea. So they should get like a comfort from that. So a big thank you for your time and all the effort that you put into the presentation. And thank you very much for all the attendees as well. And I look forward to seeing you at the next session. So keep an eye on the events and that way you know what's coming up.
Thank you. And please feel free to reach out to myself or Trent if you'd like to learn more. And thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks everybody for coming.
Okay, bye.
Bye.